Okay, let's talk about the latest boogeyman that the Republicans are targeting for no really good reason. Sort of like CRT, Eric, which stands for, let me see, where does it say what the acronym stands for? I had it. Oh, for crying out loud. So, but it's a database for voter rolls. Where does it say? Here it is. The Electronic Registration Information Center. So it is a nonpartisan, completely voluntary partnership that allows member states an efficient way to share data to keep their voter rolls more up to date. It lets local election officials know when their voters move, die, or are illegally vote in more than one state in the same election. So that sounds like a good thing, right? Well, 8 states and counting have withdrawn from ERIC because of misinformation as to what it does. Apparently, their constituents, their base, seem to think that this actually causes voter fraud, which, how exactly does that work? But like CRT, they're taking something nobody's ever heard of and making this mythology surrounding it to make it say something it doesn't actually say. So, let's see here. And it's been around since 2013. And the funny thing is, just unlike CRT, but just like a lot of things that Republicans do lately, it was something that they used to push for. And when the Louisiana governor said, yeah, we're pulling out of ERIC, a lot of people were like, what the hell? What is wrong with you? Why are people pulling out? Because this is just going to make voter fraud more prevalent. But I think that's what Republicans want. I think they want this self-fulfilling prophecy. They are so adamant that voter fraud is happening. And so far there's been no proof of widespread voter fraud, that they are trying their damnedest to make sure voter fraud happens, so then they can see, we told you, even though they're the reason that this is happening. Let's see. What else? The little secret is that maybe more than 10 years ago, someone voted in Ohio, in Florida, in Arizona, and Texas. You would have never known. Let's see. With Eric, we can compare our voter rolls to those states. And I think I've mentioned this before, but when I was working at a local food bank, we had a Christmas program. And it was in conjunction with another organization. And so we did share information. So we would know who was double dipping, who was signing up for toys in one organization, then signing up with us, because the rules were you could only sign up once. There is nothing wrong with it. Granted, there were a lot of people who were pissed off that they were caught, but that was still a good way to prevent double dipping, because we wanted the most people to be able to get benefits from this program. So this is the same thing. And the people who are pushing conspiracy theories, well, These are probably the same people who have a problem with even the thought of a gun registry. And I wonder what they do for driver's license. Do these people know that there's a registry for driver's license? Maybe you should give up your driver's license and not drive at all. Because God knows, maybe the government's watching you through that. These people need tinfoil hats. Stat. Let's see. But in January 2022, the tool drew the ire of one of the most prolific misinformation peddlers on the internet, a website called the Gateway Pundit. The right-wing website is known for pushing conspiracy theories, including the so-called birther theory about former President Barack Obama and that survivors of the Parkland shooting in Florida were crisis actors. Ugh. More recently, it published an article implying COVID vaccines were 98 times worse for people than the virus itself. I really wish these people would get a horrendous disease. Anti-vaxxers suck so bad. Because I'm sorry, if you're going to basically tell people, oh yeah, this disease is so much less dangerous than, a cure a vaccine that's, perfectly safe. All I can say is, get polio, please. Because I'm sure that they're not just anti-vax towards COVID. I'm pretty sure it's across the board. About a week before Louisiana's governor made his reference to media reports, the Gateway Pundit began targeting Eric. The website publishes a series of articles that falsely said the bipartisan partnership was a left-wing voter registration drive bankrolled by billionaire George Soros, the ultimate Republican boogeyman, aimed at helping Democrats win elections. How the holy hell? Oh wait, if they had a reasonable excuse, that it wouldn't be a conspiracy theory. Silly me. It's become clear the site ignited the election denial movement's fixation on Eric. Because yes, of course they could claim voter fraud and that the person they want to win the election won the election if they can just deny all reality whatsoever. And let's face it, most of the election fraud is against their own candidate. I mean, why? NPR analyzed hundreds of thousands of posts on 5 alternative social media sites frequented by the far right: Getter, Gab, Parler, Telegram, and Trump's Truth Social over the past 2 years, and found that conversation about Eric really only began after the first Gateway Pundit article published. Which, that doesn't surprise me if that's where they're getting their source from. A conspiracy theorist site. The Gateway Pundit's initial article drew extensively on the writing and interviews of Adams, the conservative voting attorney. In late 2021, Adams appeared on a conservative radio program called Eric Diabolical. His voting advocacy law firm has sued a number of states for records related to Eric, and he even wrote that what's believed to be the first article ever alleging a connection between Soros and Eric back in 2016. The Soros-funded Open Society Foundation has given money previously to the Pew Charitable Trusts, which helped start Eric, but Soros has never had any involvement in the organization. Yet, like facts ever got in the way of these people. In an interview with NPR this year, Adams said he never intended his criticisms to lead to states actually leaving the organization. So, what was the point? My view is that it's better to be in Eric than not in Eric. To be in Eric than not in Eric, Adams said. Because without it, it's absolutely impossible to do cross-state checking to see who's voting twice in federal elections. Which is the fucking point. Because what better way to prove yourself right that voter fraud is happening than to ensure that voter fraud is happening? Genius. Adams took credit for being the first to criticize Eric, citing concerns about transparency. But when asked how the debate turned into organizational tweaks into states leaving, he said people with more extreme views cherry-picked what they wanted to see in his work. Well, that checks out. The far right served his critiques to a wider audience of people, primed since 2020 to believe there's a broad national effort to steal elections. Eric's novel and complicated structure, a national organization that no regular person had heard of, fit perfectly into that false narrative. The citizens on the right have, after 2020, gotten highly engaged in election administration. They're not going away, Adams said. They're not always doing harm either. It wasn't long ago that everybody on each side of the political spectrum was a fan of transparency, a fan of citizens being allowed to know what their government was doing. And that's what these individuals view themselves as doing, trying to get to the bottom of what Eric is up to. This is where Louisiana and groups like We the People chapter in HUMA come in. Since 2020, Secretary Ardoin has found himself on a tightrope familiar to many Republican election officials. He's an express voting administrator, having worked in the Secretary of State's office for roughly a decade. But the majority of GOP voters still don't believe Joe Biden won the 2020 election legitimately, and they have little confidence in election officials, especially in states that aren't their own. So what I'm hearing is, unless they think like you do, you're not going to believe them. No, that's not how that works. Maybe instead of assuming that there's this overall boogeyman that has no other purpose but to screw you over, that, and by boogeyman I mean in the shadows, someone you can't see, maybe accept reality. If there's no evidence of it, then it probably isn't happening. Last year, Ardoin was gearing up to run for re-election himself and facing numerous challenges from his right in a state Trump won by almost 20 percentage points. He was soon engaging with people who denied the 2020 election results in a way he had largely avoided previously. He set aside speaking limits rules at a public meeting last year, for instance, so MyPillow founder and election denial influencer Mike Lindell could talk at length to a commission assigned with picking Louisiana's next voting system. He acknowledged to me that it had become very politically unpopular and that there had been a lot of heat politically about Eric. Let's see. LaRose ran for re-election last year in Ohio, and he said he noticed the issue bubbling up on the campaign trail too. You can see where somebody who's out there trying to prove their conservative bona fides in a primary, which is what you do, would read this Gateway Pundit article and say, okay, that thing is bad, let's get our state out of it. But hopefully over time, the noise about this starts to die down and other states look to get back into it. So LaRose spoke with NPR on February 17th, and a month later, he announced Ohio was leaving Eric as well. So, I swear this is just simply people who just want to have any excuse not to be in any database whatsoever. No central database, which on some level I can understand the privacy issues, but again, driver's license registries work. That nobody says a peep about them. So I fail to see why this is an issue. Until you can point to me an issue with Eric where voter fraud occurred, or that Democrats were using this to win elections, all you're doing is blowing smoke up your own ass. That isn't how reality works. You need evidence to back up your claims, not I'm afraid of my own shadow and I only want things to go the way I want them to, and not accept that there are people who don't agree with me. Then this article goes into describing how Eric got started. Let's see if there's anything else about the actual conspiracy. Let's see. A Secretary of State candidate in Alabama promised he would pull out of Eric if he won. Claims Soros can take his minions and his database and troll someone else because Alabamans are going to be off limits permanently, said Wes Allen, who served previously in Alabama's House of Representatives. He said he heard about Eric after Louisiana pulled out, and he remembers reading the Gateway Pundit article around the same time. We started hearing it on the campaign trail, too. This subject matter came up, so we made the decision pretty quickly that, hey, we're not going to participate in Eric. Allen went on to win the state's Republican primary in June and followed through on his Eric promise after winning the state's general election. But in an interview with NPR, he struggled to articulate the specific concerns he had with the partnership that led him to pull the state out. Kind of like they can't explain why CRT is bad, why being woke is bad. Actually, they can't define woke without being laughed out of a room. Ron DeSantis recently finally gave a definition for woke, and it was just a word salad. That it's a form of cultural Marxism, whatever the fuck that means. Anyway, one false alleged Soros connection, for instance, Allen said he no longer cared whether the billionaire was actually involved with the program or not. I'm sorry, on the false alleged. That makes much more sense. I mean, it's maintained now by the states, but it really doesn't matter in my mind who funded Eric. We're still not going to participate in it. It doesn't matter if it was a leftist group or a right group. Whoever. We just feel, and I heard loud and clear on the campaign trail that the people of Alabama want their data protected. I knew it. It's a privacy thing. But I'm sorry, but how exactly do you expect people to catch voter cheats if people don't have access to voter rolls? Hell, you go to the polls, they have your name and address in a book. So if you want your data protected, guess what? Your data is out there. The only way to thoroughly and utterly protect your data is to go live in a fucking cave and never come out. Don't have an address, don't vote, don't have a social security number, none of that. Because the only way you're going to not have your data completely out there, even with organizations that need it because of things like we need to know who's our constituent so we can make sure that only the people who should be voting vote. If you're not going to participate in that either, then you might as well not live in society, because at some level you do have to have your data shared, because that's the only way society works. It's like going up to someone and refusing to state your name because they might steal your name or something. How far does this frickin' go? Seriously. I understand privacy. I understand your data wanting to protect yourself. But come on, let's be reasonable. Again, your driver's license is registered in the central database. You don't like it? Don't drive. Let your license expire. It's getting to the point where it's like, become Amish, please, because that way, you don't have to worry about this shit. A vague concern about data privacy has become a key motivator for a number of states that have now pulled out of ERIC. I love it how it says vague. But there's never been any evidence of a data breach at ERIC or any data being shared without a state's permission. Thank you. ERIC uses a security process called one-way hashing to encrypt all the sensitive data, driver's license numbers, the last 4 digits of social security numbers, it receives from states before it analyzes it. And I'm sure a lot of these people are on computers, and most likely a lot of them do shopping from, say, Amazon. Okay, so you don't want to send your data to a respectable organization, but you're okay with Amazon having it. Right. Yeah, just because you want to buy something cheap. Again, your data is going to get out there. You just have to decide who is legit. This is legit. You're seeing the numbers. There is nothing bad has happened. And to pull out because something bad could happen, well, someone could steal your identity when you buy something from Amazon too. Are you going to stop buying from Amazon? Probably not. Election officials also noted that most of the data ERIC receives is already widely available as public record. Okay. So, yeah. All right. As usual, conspiracy theories make no sense. But Allen made clear to NPR he was making a political decision. He said he did not speak to ERIC staff or any election officials from member states other than Louisiana before withdrawing. And his decision was especially striking since Alabama's previous Republican Secretary of State, John Merrill, is one of ERIC's biggest fans. ERIC has been one of the most effective tools that we have had in the area of election administration, Merrill said. Nobody has ever been able to introduce any vulnerabilities, inconsistencies, or irregularities related to ERIC or the administration of the ERIC system, period. When in office, Merrill noted that since 2016, ERIC had helped Alabama identify more than 19,000 records for voters who appeared to have died and more than 222,000 records of voters who appeared to have moved out of state. When Allen was asked by NPR how he would replicate that data, he indicated that he thought the services ERIC provided weren't useful. Oh my God. Making sure dead people don't vote, or people who are out of state don't vote in elections they're not supposed to, that's not useful? Good God. There's a misconception that we have a computer that we can use here in our office, that we can just go check these other lists from other states, Allen said. That's not the case at all. We send the data, they run it through their algorithms in this private out-of-state group. I so want to bang my head on the desk. I really, really do. NPR noted that seemed to be precisely the value of ERIC, using technology instead of staff to manually sift through millions of records. And Allen responded, "We recognize that keeping our voter rolls clean is of utmost importance. It's going to be a good opportunity for us to maintain our oversight on our voter registration lists here in Alabama." He said he would not commit more money or hire more staff to work on the issue, however. Of course not, because again, they want voter fraud so they can point and say, look, voter fraud, even though they're the reason that voter fraud is happening. Oh my God. This is hurting my head. For a while, it looked like the bleeding for Eric might stop with Ruby Red, Louisiana, and Alabama. But under the radar, a powerful pressure campaign was building on the right. This spring, the dam burst. Oh my God, this idiot, Cleta Mitchell. On a voting podcast called Who's Counting, Eric has become a frequent villain. Eric is a very insidious organization, said the host Cleta Mitchell in one episode from last summer. This is the same Dipsy Doodle who claimed that if we allow voter sites to be on college campuses, that college students could just wake up, go and vote, and then go back to bed, as if that's what college was. So yeah, she's definitely a Nimrod. Mitchell is an influential Republican election attorney who was at the center of Trump's failed attempts to overturn the 2020 election. She was on the infamous phone call in the early 2021 when Trump asked Georgia election officials to find votes. And she spent the time since building an election denial infrastructure. Her podcast has become a central hub for stolen election narratives, and she's also started a coalition of grassroots groups across the country called the Election Integrity Network. These groups host trainings and meetings aimed at helping local folks unrig the elections in their communities. NPR's investigation found Mitchell and these sorts of groups to be central in the effort to discredit and dismantle Eric. Mitchell declined an NPR request for an interview, gee, can't imagine why, but told NPR in a text message that she first heard about Eric when Erdogan pulled Louisiana out in January 2022. Shortly after that, the Michigan chapter of her Election Integrity Network wrote about it on its website for the first time. It's supposed to be cleaning the voter rolls, but it's not. It's a covert method of registering targeted voters. What? Said Patrice Johnson, the leader of the Michigan group, when she appeared on Mitchell's podcast. I'm just thrilled you are working on Eric, Mitchell replied. We want more citizens to say to their legislators, do not continue your membership. The Michigan chapter published a How to Discuss Eric with Your State Legislator guide, and NPR found similar callouts all over the country. One group called Protect Your Vote Florida published a page on its website called How to Influence Florida Legislatures to Suspend Contract with Eric. The strategy is to run a campaign directed at key Florida legislatures, wrote the group in the Post, which included a list of the state's lawmakers and contact information. Hand-delivered letters, emails, phone calls, and social media activity will all be utilized to maximize impact. Election officials say they felt the effects of these calls immediately. We saw an uptick in Republican legislators wanting to know more about Eric, almost as if there was some sort of national effort to ask Republican lawmakers and secretaries of state to start asking questions and challenging it, said Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, a Democrat. In Missouri, NPR acquired emails that showed Republican legislators and voters peppering the Secretary of State's office with questions about the partnership. Can you shed any light on these concerns? Wrote then Missouri GOP Representative John Simmons in a July email to the Chief of Staff for Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft. Recent Eric objections surfaced late in the session. The sources are sometimes the sky is falling worries, but still want to vet the issue. Simmons forwarded a Gateway Pundit link sent to him by a constituent. This is totally false, responded Ashcroft's chief of staff, Trish Vinson. Again, people spreading things out of fear. In Texas, one election integrity group even claimed it had helped write legislation that would take the state out of Eric, as VoteBeat first reported. That bill is now at the governor's desk. And in Pennsylvania, a self-described open-source investigator named Heather Honey took up the cause. Honey worked on the widely discredited election audit in Maricopa County, Arizona, and last summer she and Mitchell began working together. Like I said, they are desperately wanting voter fraud to happen so then they can point and say, see, voter fraud, let us fix it for you. And it's more of, let us take full control and power, and you'll never see power again. Mitchell declined to answer questions about her work with Honey, and Honey did not respond to multiple email requests for an interview. But on June 17th of last year, Mitchell convened a secret ERIC summit with red state lawmakers at the Conservative Partnership Institute, where Mitchell is senior legal fellow. There, Honey presented a 29-page report she put together called ERIC, a threat to election integrity. Secretaries of State from the first 5 states to withdraw from ERIC attended the 4-hour event, according to an email sent to North Carolina state lawmakers by the head of a local election integrity group who says he attended the meeting. The nonprofit investigative watchdog group shared the email with NPR, along with an agenda from the meeting that showed that Honey presented there for an hour. It's not clear whether Honey volunteered or was paid to produce her report, but it began circulating widely among conservatives, and she began speaking about ERIC with local election integrity groups too. Documented obtained an audio recording of Honey presented at a conservative activist conference in Pennsylvania earlier this year and shared it with NPR. ERIC talking points: if you go and talk to your representatives, make sure that they know that this is an unnecessary sharing of highly sensitive Social Security number, driver's license data on all of us, including our children, Honey said. We really have to fight to get out of there. As an anti-ERIC campaign intensified last summer, members within the organization start thinking about how they could stave off a mass exodus. At that time, late last year, the only state to have actually left was Louisiana. Alabama's Allen hadn't even been elected yet. But state election directors were feeling the pressure. So ERIC put together a working group to brainstorm updates the organization could make to try to satisfy its critics. Around that time, Florida got a new Secretary of State, a state representative named Corey Byrd, who was appointed to the role by Governor Ron DeSantis. Byrd had previously declined to say Biden won the 2020 election, and he's an ally of Mitchell's. At an event in Orlando last spring before he was secretary, Mitchell introduced him. I do a Friday phone call every week with election integrity leaders from across the country, and Cord signs on and chips in on some of those calls most of the time, Mitchell said, according to a recording of the event acquired by Documented and shared with NPR. When Byrd appeared on her podcast later in the year, Mitchell noted how receptive he had been to the grassroots right. You've had such a great open door and willing to listen, and you are very much appreciated, Mitchell said. People know that election integrity is something that you have had near and dear to your heart even before you became Secretary of State. Byrd declined an NPR request for an interview. Again, shocking. But Florida's stance on ERIC shifted almost immediately after he got the job. DeSantis had his state join ERIC in 2019, and he is on record as supporting the partnership as recently as last year. The governor started a controversial elections police force, which in its first annual report said specifically that it relied on ERIC data to identify hundreds of voters who appeared to have voted in Florida, as well as another state in the last presidential election. But a few months after Byrd was appointed, Florida began blatantly breaking ERIC's rules. To be members in good standing, all states are regularly required to do certain list maintenance activities, as well as use ERIC's data to send a postcard with registration information to eligible but unregistered voters. That outreach was critical to the partisan balance that ERIC achieved, but now it had become a critical part of the conspiracy claim that the organization was a left-wing plot to register Democratic voters and steal elections. When Honey spoke to the group in Pennsylvania, she said Eric was bloating the rolls by sending registration information to eligible people. So you just want them to send it to ineligible people? I do not understand what the problem is with that. Unless you mean eligible people that wouldn't vote Republican. And you just didn't say the quiet part out loud. The impact of Eric is that instead of cleaning up our voter rolls, they add more people to it. Okay. People die and people turn 18 and can vote? What? People who aren't even interested or disengaged don't really want to register, but they just, you ask them enough times, they're going to say yes. Okay. I get charities who bug me incessantly for donations. By this logic, we should shut those charities down because they're just incessantly bothering you. Yes, they're going to bother you, but you know what? It's a postcard. You can just toss it. You do not need to respond. Help. Florida's unless this is a personal issue, it's like, oh, they keep bothering me, so I'm just gonna, I don't want to keep getting these postcards, so I'm just gonna do what they ask. That's a personal problem. That's not the way most people respond. They might actually ask you to stop sending stuff, but they wouldn't actually give in and give you the information you want. Florida's election staff claimed the state was exempt from the organization's outreach requirement, but Eric's staff in other states did not see it that way. The election official spoke to NPR and background characterized Florida's action as saying, "Screw you, we're not going to do it." It's really hard not to call their excuse a bold-faced lie. Yep. All right. Let's see. So Eric was left scrambling to respond. Technically, Florida could have been kicked out of Eric immediately for breaking the membership agreement, but data from the giant state was valuable, and it seemed certain that a red state exodus would follow if Florida departed. The working group began pushing a plan that would eliminate requirements for members to allow each member state to use Eric's data, however it pleased, if they would just stay. It was referred to as an a la carte proposal. Okay, what? I do not understand. And the plan initially had buy-in. On a call earlier this year, elections directors from all of Eric's member states voiced support for structural changes. Then politics interfered. Democrats like Minnesota Secretary of State Steve Simon pushed back against the notion of changing the organization to satisfy the far right. Yep. I don't think any state appreciates it when Eric has a gun to his head, and that feels an awful lot like what happened. Well, that's par for the course with right-wingers. That's why we ended up with a debt ceiling debacle because, they have to put a gun to people's heads in hopes they get at least something of what they want, because if they did things the legit way, they would never get what they want because what they want sucks. Another concession on the table was a Republican demand to cut out Eric founder Becker, whose involvement as a non-voting advisor had become another conspiracy theory plot point. Here's a better idea. Don't believe shit from a conspiracy theory website? That would be helpful. In 2020, Becker's current nonprofit helped administer hundreds of millions of dollars in grants from Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg and his wife to help election officials respond to the pandemic. Okay. For the far right, that was evidence Becker was a liberal operative, even though that money went to both Republican-led and Democratic-led districts. NPR also spoke with a number of Republican election officials who said Becker had been instrumental in helping them in their work, and one even began crying when speaking about Becker's role in standing up for beleaguered voting workers after the 2020 election. Again, because, facts don't matter to these people. They just see what they want to see. The stage was set for an ERIC board meeting in March with more on the table than ever. At its core, in an effort to move forward, members were set to decide whether ERIC should concede to complaints motivated by conspiracy theorists targeting the organization. But before they could even vote, the exodus began. On March 6th, Florida, Missouri, and West Virginia announced that they were pulling out of ERIC. The stated reason was that ERIC was being partisan and dismissive of their concerns, despite the fact that the states withdrew from their partnership before the vote on changes they were pushing for. Of course, because they were afraid that they would get what they wanted, and that isn't what they wanted. They wanted to be out of ERIC, so again, they could have the self-fulfilling prophecy of they're claiming voter fraud, and now they're making it the environment ripe for voter fraud. So they can point to that and say, see, we told you. You can't trust these people when they're the ones who caused the problems to begin with. As Secretary of State, I have an obligation to protect the personal information of Florida's citizens, which the ERIC agreement requires us to share, Florida's Byrd said in a statement. Florida has tried to back reforms to increase protections, but those protections were refused. Therefore, we have lost confidence in ERIC. Before those changes were even voted on. Nothing says, no, I never wanted to actually, this was never a good faith argument to begin with, than pulling your state out before the vote on the changes you actually wanted. The Gateway pundit claimed that Missouri Secretary of State Ashcroft notified the outlet before he notified the public. VoteBeat later confirmed that with Ashcroft. During an appearance on Mitchell's podcast, Ashcroft alluded to not wanting to pull out of ERIC when Mitchell first approached him about it. We cussed and discussed about it. What? The emails NPR acquired in Missouri show Ashcroft's staff calling the initial Gateway Pundit article horrible and misleading, and saying that they were glad to be a part of ERIC. But ultimately, Mitchell got her way. You have a lot of credibility with people because of that leadership, she said. I hope so, the secretary responded. There are a lot of people that think I should have left a lot earlier, including you, I think. I'm just glad you left, Mitchell laughed. This article never ends. Lord. The March ERIC meeting went ahead, and with 3 fewer Republican-led states, the structural changes failed to pass. Shocking. Ohio Secretary of State LaRose called ERIC one of the best fraud-fighting tools that we have, just 3 months prior, and Iowa, whose Secretary of State Pate called it a godsend, pulled out shortly after. Virginia followed suit in May. Pate released a statement saying ERIC would be less useful now with other states leaving. Unfortunately, the organization just seemed to dig in and fight, said LaRose in an interview with NPR in May. And so after a year of trying to preserve what I thought could have been a useful institution, had been a useful institution for a long time, we arrived at the point where my decision was that it's worth saving, but it's not worth saving at any cost. Ohio was an ERIC member for 6 years and joined voluntarily under the same rules and requirements that Republicans were now saying were unacceptable. Still, LaRose was adamant misinformation did not influence his decision. Wild ideas about conspiracies of data leaked out to the back door and secret funding sources and all that kind of stuff, I've rejected all of that, LaRose said. What we've said all along is that this organization needs to be more accountable. There's a common thread that connects many of the election officials who decide to pull out of Eric: ambition. LaRose is widely expected to run for the Republican primary for the U.S. Senate in 2024. In Florida, DeSantis, who appointed Byrd, has announced he is a candidate for 2024 Republican presidential nomination. And Secretaries of State in West Virginia, Missouri, Mac Warner and Ashcroft have both announced runs for governor. But Eric founder Becker, who stepped down from his advisory role under pressure before the March meeting, said those looking to court the far right for political points should tread carefully. A variety of elected officials have thought they could just give the mouse a cookie and it'll go away, Becker said. The mouse never goes away. And this is true. The far right is getting so insane that you need to win those people to win the Republican primary, but then you have to go all the way back to at least center, if not right of center, to court everybody else. And so you might win this far right Looney Tunes, but you're not going to win a general, because most people are like, you guys are cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. All right. Back in Louisiana, where this Eric saga began in earnest, Secretary of State Erdogan recently announced that he has decided not to seek re-election. It is shameful and outright dangerous, he said in his retirement announcement, that a small minority of vocal individuals have chosen to denigrate the hard work of our election staff and spread unproven falsehoods. At a voting event this spring, Erdogan said fighting election conspiracies often felt like a losing battle. So wait, aren't you the one who wanted to pull Louisiana out? And now you're whining that conspiracy theories have been taking over politics? You know, that says a lot about Republicans, that they become sane when there is nothing to fight for anymore. They no longer are in politics, so they can tell the truth. It says a lot about their spines. Eric is fractured but still standing, though with less shared data and higher costs for remaining members. Some red state legislatures like Texas and Oklahoma have passed anti-Eric bills. Trump himself has urged states to get out of the compact, but the partnership still has more than 24 member states, including Republican governments like South Carolina, Utah, and Georgia. California has legislation winding its way through its state government that would allow that massive and data-rich state to join too. For the states that have left, election experts say the consequence is that over time their rolls will almost certainly be less accurate. Brianna Lennon, a Democrat who oversees voting in Boone County, Missouri, says that that will surely be the case in her county. Before the state joined Eric, the elections office relied on returned mail to find out if a voter moved to another state. That's what we'll have to go back to using. Now, for those who wonder what's the problem with that, most people have mail forwarding. So they can get their mail and then use that to give the corrected address for mail that they want to continue receiving. Well, what if you're getting notices about whether you still live in a state and you just toss it, you ignore it? Well, then that mail never gets returned then. For maybe, I think it's 6 months to a year. And by then, it's going, your rolls are going to be, are going to be out of sync from what they should be. So in theory, these people could go to that state and vote there because there'll be no evidence that they moved out of state. Uh, London has gotten a sense recently that community election integrity groups were gaining more traction in our state. But she says that this Eric decision was the first major policy decision that she's seen that's lined up so directly with their goals. I'm sure there are going to be ripples that come from this particular move, and I'm not exactly sure that what the end will be, she said. I don't think this is an isolated thing. So that's all I have from that article. But yeah, it's just a matter of Republicans. They claim it's that they believe in these conspiracy theories, or that they worry about data protection. But no, they just want to, at least the people who started this, like Cleta Mitchell, like the Gateway Pundit, they want to put elections, they want to draw attention to election integrity in a way that more people will start to doubt whether an election was fair. Now, granted, they'll only whine if they lose. Obviously, if they win, then it magically was just fine and dandy. But they want to, but they know that it's getting harder and harder to win elections, especially like the presidential election. Because, again, they've gotten so far right. And so, whether you actually believe this Looney Tunes, you have to say this crazy ass stuff just to be heard in the Republican primary, let alone win. And then you have to come back all the way to the world of sanity, because that's where most people live. Well, if there's already evidence of you going completely batshit, coming back is going to be hard. You can't just say, "Oh, I lied because I just wanted to win the primary." I mean, what are the chances people are going to believe you, especially if you have a body of work that says otherwise? So, yeah, they're just trying to cause chaos. They are trying to get power however they can, whether it's legit or illegitimate means, so they can keep the power and just do whatever the hell they want. So, anyway, that article went way long. So, oh wow, I've been talking for almost an hour. No wonder my mouth hurts. Okay, so with that, I will see you probably tomorrow with a really, really fun article. So, with that, I will see you tomorrow.